I have to admit, going to therapy was one of the hardest things I've ever done, hands down. But it completely changed my life. So I want to make this video to share with you my experience with therapy, why I decided to go, and hopefully this will kind of give you a better understanding of what therapy is all about, just in case you are thinking about going but you just don't know if you want to pull the trigger and make that first appointment. So yeah, let's just get right to it. So I started going to therapy about 2 years ago. It was not something I ever thought I wanted to do, but I was just going through a lot of issues during that time, and I had a lot of trauma that kind of surfaced up, and I noticed I just was sad a lot, and I didn't know why I was feeling the way I was feeling, and it started to really affect my day-to-day life. Like I just was not in a good place. And luckily, like, I had people to talk to. I remember during that time especially, I spoke with my boyfriend a lot and just spilled a lot of my issues onto him, and he was sweet. He always listened, but he always recommended maybe I should go to therapy because it's something he has done before. And when he first recommended that, I definitely was like, no, I'm not doing that. That just seems weird. I don't need to go talk to a stranger about my problems. Or I also remember thinking, like, I'm not that messed up. Like, I don't need to go to a random stranger and go to a counselor and talk to them about my problem. Like, I'm strong enough to handle it on my own. Just a lot of different thoughts were going through my head, and most of them originated from the fact that I didn't really understand what it would be like to go to a therapist, and I always equated going to counseling as a form of weakness. I thought if somebody admitted that they were going through a hard time and need help from somebody else, then they must be super weak and just can't handle their own problems properly. But I have since learned that that's definitely not the case. So after about 6 months of me just being in a really dark place, my boyfriend convinced me to just make like one appointment. And so I was like, well, I guess it won't hurt for me to do one appointment. And plus I felt like if I didn't like it, I didn't have to really commit to it right away. And I was at that point just so desperate because I was not doing good at all. So I made my first initial appointment, and the first thing I want to explain to you is you cannot decide whether or not therapy is for you from the very first appointment, because the first appointment is just like literally an evaluation. They're trying to figure out what you need help with. Like, you don't go in depth on anything in particular on the first day. You're just kind of giving them an evaluation of like where you're at in life. So I decided to continue doing it, and I have done therapy for 2 years now, and so I am so glad I did it. My first 6 months of doing counseling, I think, was probably the hardest. During those 6 months, I was talking about a lot of things that happened when I was younger that I didn't really realize had affected me so much. And after I opened up about those things, I had to go home and reflect on it, because all of a sudden I had opened up a lot of wounds, and I needed to learn to heal from it properly. So I would say like my first 6 months of therapy was probably the hardest. However, after that was kind of when I started figuring out that the things I went through, like, yeah, they sucked, they were not fun, but then I started learning that like they don't control me. I'm not defined by the struggles that I'm going through, and I do have control on how I'm going to react to them. And it wasn't until I continued to go to counseling and do the hard work of choosing to consistently show up to my appointments, open up about what's bothering me, and then take the steps and apply the lessons that the counselor was teaching me. So as I look back to all of my counseling experience, there was like 3 things it taught me. It taught me a lot, but the 3 things I'm thinking of right now really stood out to me. The first one was that I'm not crazy. I remember before going to counseling, I used to think like, oh my gosh, like I am crazy. Why am I feeling these feelings? Like, why am I thinking about things that happened to me when I was 7 years old? Like, who does that? I seriously just felt so crazy. I felt like there was no way that anybody else on this earth would think the way I thought. And I felt crazy for letting things bother me. I thought I was being irrational. I felt like I was being super dramatic, but at the same time, I was just so high on my emotions that I felt like I had no control. I was just crying every day about some random things that happened throughout my life, and I just felt insane. But as I went to counseling, my therapist always just assured me that I'm not crazy, that there are so many people on this earth who feel those kind of feelings, and that I was simply just dealing with issues that I had faced throughout life, and anybody going through those kind of things like has the right to be emotional and to be down. And so yeah, the very first thing it taught me is that I'm definitely not crazy, I'm just struggling. The second thing I learned through counseling was how to cope with my traumas. I've done a few other videos talking about my past traumas. I've even done a video on how to deal with past traumas, but if it wasn't for counseling, I don't think I would have ever really understood the kind of effect my trauma had made on my life and how I think and how I make decisions now. But through counseling, I started to realize that there were things that I can do now to help me cope with some of the things that I have gone through. Counseling also gave me a lot of coping strategies to deal with my anxiety that I deal with right now, especially in this season of life. That's one thing my counselor has really been teaching me, is different ways to cope with my anxiety. And that's so relieving, because if you have anxiety, you probably understand this, but sometimes it just feels like you have no control over your anxiety and it can just take over, and it can be so frustrating to not know what to do and how to cope with it. But through counseling, I am learning all these different strategies that help minimize my anxiety. Like, don't get me wrong, I still have days, weeks sometimes where I just feel very anxious and there isn't much I can do. However, there are also plenty of days where I feel my anxiety coming on and I can instantly start implementing some of the strategies that my counselor has taught me to avoid from a big panic attack from happening. So I'm so thankful for counseling, because if it wasn't for counseling, I think I probably would have lived the rest of my life feeling like I have absolutely no control over my anxiety. And the last thing I learned through counseling, this is kind of there's like a part 1 and part 2. First is it taught me to love myself more, and then the part 2 is it taught me to love others more. Before counseling, I think I was very hard on myself. I always thought I was just irrational for having feelings and emotions. But through counseling, I was able to kind of learn about the Karis who has been really hurt, and see myself as somebody that's just in pain, and I needed to be nicer to myself. I needed to love myself, because what's the point of me continue to beat myself up and tell myself that I'm not strong enough and hating myself for having these emotions. Instead, why not empathize with myself and be a little easier on myself and love myself? So I know for sure if I hadn't gone to counseling and somebody was there sitting with me and listening to me and telling me that like the stuff I've gone through, it was hard, and just validating my feelings, I don't think I would have ever come to the part where I started to respect and love myself. So for that, I'm very thankful. And it helps me love others more, because you realize when you go through hard stuff, you're a little bit more compassionate for others, because you get a little glimpse of what it feels like to be lonely, what it feels like to experience pain, which makes it a little easier to empathize with others and love others. That's all I have for you. I hope this video was helpful to you. If you are thinking about going to therapy, I 10 out of 10 would recommend it. It has really changed my life and how I look at life now. So feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make a lot of content around this kind of topic. Follow me on Instagram. But yeah, that's all I have today, and until next time, bye!